everyone, so in this video we're going to be talking about the digestive system, but we're primarily going to be focusing on the role of enzymes because the digestive system has basically two components. We have the mechanical breakdown of food, which happens at the mouth due to teeth chewing and ripping material. Also happens in the stomach due to churning, so when we're moving around that material. Those are mechanical breakdowns, but that's just not enough to digest all of the food that you're consuming. The other part of the breakdown that we have is chemical breakdown, and that is done by enzymes. So if we're looking at the digestive system, the entire role of the digestive system is to break down and transform the food that you eat so it can be used in a format that your body can use as fuel. So that means for our carbohydrates, I've broken it down into glucose. For our protein, we've broken it down into amino acids. And for our fats, we've broken them down into fatty acids. So the digestive system really needs to break it down into those basic components. So if we're looking at it from a global perspective, ingestion of food. For your body to break down the food, you first need to put it into your body. So that's step one. And where do we ingest the food? In the mouth. Second is to digest the food. So we do it two ways, chemically and mechanically. Mechanically, again, by teeth, by your stomach, and chemically by the enzymes that are produced by a bunch of glands in your body. Then we need to absorb the food. Now, it's all good that you can break it down. It's all good that you can make it into those building blocks, which again, our building blocks are the glucose, the amino acids, and your fatty acids, but you need to absorb it. And the absorption of your food happens in your small intestines, and then elimination of waste, because your body doesn't use all of the food that you ingest. The ones that it does use, it goes into your bloodstream, and the ones that it doesn't, well, your body needs to get rid of it through the elimination of that waste. So if we are looking at the entire digestive system, you are pretty much a tube inside a tube. So the tube starts here in the mouth, add some arms and legs, and some things happen along the way, aka you break down the food, you rip it into smaller pieces, it absorbs in your bloodstream, continues on, and then it comes out there. So all of this together is your gastrointestinal tract. And anything that goes at the top, right, it gets absorbed in the body, and the absorption happens in our small intestine. So if we look at absorption at a very fundamental statement, right, the food has to be broken down into smaller pieces in the small intestine because only certain size particles will get through your small intestine. So if we have our gastrointestinal tract, and then we have our body, which is our bloodstream, and then we have right here in the middle the passageway between it, so in our small intestines, right, only the particles that are small enough to get through the layer in our small intestines will go into our bloodstream. So if we're looking at our particles, so we have starch, which again are complex carbohydrates, and we have our individual glucose molecules. Based on the size of these particles, only the smallest ones are going to get through. The starch is not going to get through the blood barrier at our small intestines, but all of our very small glucose molecules can. And that's the key thing that we need to realize, is that your body needs to process and break down our large particles before it can go through into the bloodstream. So two key components are tract. So those are all of the organs that process our food and break it down into smaller pieces. And we have our mechanical digestion. So again, chewing, breaking it down into smaller pieces that happen in the mouth. And churning is when the stomach walls are contracting, the mixing of the gastric juices, that movement, again, breaks down our pieces even smaller. And then we have, equally important, is our chemical digestion. And it's probably, out of the two, they're both really important. The mechanical digestion breaks down our pieces into smaller sizes, and our chemical digestion really chemically breaks those down, because for chemical reactions to take place, the bigger the surface area, the faster the reaction occurs. So when you are breaking down the food into smaller pieces, you're actually increasing the surface area to allow for your enzymatic reactions to happen faster. So these two things, even though they're quite different, they need to work hand in hand to break down your food into smaller pieces. And chemical digestion happens due to the use of enzymes. So saliva in your mouth breaks down starch. Gastric juices in your stomach breaks down protein. Pancreatic juices, which is basically made in the pancreas and sent to the small intestine to break down all three of your key groups. Bile, which is made in your liver, stored in the gallbladder, brought to the small intestine to break down your three macronutrient groups. Same thing with intestinal juices. All of those enzymes break down your complex carbohydrates, your proteins, your complex fats into their fundamental basic units: glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids. Also important are the glands. So all the glands that produces the enzymes to allow for the chemical digestion to take place, because mechanical digestion alone will not break down your food into the fundamental parts. You need to have both mechanical and chemical working together. Enzymes. Key thing about enzymes, they're things that speed up chemical reactions, because most of the chemical reactions that happen in your body need to happen at high temperatures for the reaction to take place. But you can't increase your body temperature. 37 degrees is the temperature that your body functions at. So that's why your body has enzymes to speed up the chemical reaction. And what they really do is they hold your complex particles in place so that you can have the breakup of your complex particles into smaller particles. So if I'm looking at a starch molecule, for my starch molecule to actually break up into its individual glucose sugars, because all of those circles are glucose circles, the bonds between each starch molecule needs to break. And a lot of the time for the bonds to break, smaller particles need to physically interact with these bonds. And those smaller particles are usually high energy particles. Now, if you just have the starch molecule suspended in solution, eventually you're going to have those interactions take place. But we can't wait for eventually. We need to make sure that we break these particles down as quick as possible. There comes in your enzymes. So if we're looking at something like amylase, it locks the starch into place. So the starch molecule can't move anymore, making it more able for our particles, so our water molecule, to basically physically break those bonds in between. And then you have the amylase locking, coming in, breaking, amylase locking, coming in, breaking, until all of that basically breaks up. Now, in our body, we have three key groups of enzymes. And the groups of enzymes are based on what they break down. So amylase breaks down starch into glucose. Protease breaks down protein into amino acids. And lipase breaks down fats into fatty acids. Now, since starch is probably the most complex carbohydrate molecule that you have, its digestion happens immediately. It's first found in the saliva, so we can get that digestion take place quicker. Because remember, carbohydrates is your body's #1 energy source. Out of the 3 macronutrients your body wants to digest, carbohydrates the first. And since starch is a complex carbohydrate, it's a polysaccharide, it has to break down all of those individual bonds to get your glucose molecule. So it's going to start digestion in the saliva, in your mouth. Then as your food goes into your stomach, you also are going to have amylase in your gastric juices to continue the digestion. And then eventually when it gets into your small intestine, you're going to have, again, more amylase to break down any remaining starch. Protease, protein, is basically starting its digestion in the stomach, found in your gastric juices, continues in the small intestines. Lipase is breaking down just your fatty acids and glycerol, so your complex fats into your individual parts, and that breakdown starts in your intestines. So if we're looking at our digestive enzymes, the enzyme that breaks down starch, again, is amylase. It locks into place in starch, and it breaks the individual molecules between the glucose molecules. So we have the liberation of those individual glucose molecules, and the end result is glucose. Now, protease attacks proteins the same way that amylase attacks starch. That the protease locks into our protein molecule, breaks our individual bonds in between our amino acids, and our end result ends up being our individual amino acids. Now, just like amylase breaks down starch, just like protease breaks down protein, well, lipase does the same type of thing for fat, where it's going to be cutting our molecule, and that we get the liberation of our glycerol and our fatty acids to our individual components. I hope this helps, and make sure to keep watching our series of videos on the digestive system and nutrition.